Listeners, if you've been paying attention to the news, you may have heard about an executive order that was recently signed to expedite the review of psychedelic drugs like psilocybin. And if you haven't, maybe you've heard of psychedelic therapy in another context and you're now curious about what it is, how it works, or why anyone would want to do it, or maybe why they shouldn't. Well, this week, I have the special privilege of talking with someone who can answer all of these questions and so many others, and that person is Stacey Simmons. Stacey is a licensed marriage and family therapist, certified psychedelic therapist, and author of The Queen's Path and the subject of today's discussion, Mushroom Pharmacy, a practical guide to psychedelic mushrooms. During our conversation, we take a deep dive into all things psychedelic and what from this modality you can put into practice even if you never partake of psychedelics. Let's begin. Welcome to Writing Resilience, the podcast for writers who want to write and live the story that sets them free. I'm your host, Lisa Cooper Ellison, a writer, transformational and trauma-informed coach, story alchemist, and fellow traveler on the winding road of healing and creativity. Each week, I'll share tools, practices, and conversations that will help you let go of what no longer serves you as you create stories that change lives, especially your own. Together, we'll explore how to trust your creative voice, support your mental health and resilience, work with your nervous system and unique design, and stay connected to your deepest calling as a writer, even when life gets messy. It's time, my friends, to write and live the story that sets you free. I'm honored to walk that journey alongside you, one story and one episode at a time. Well, hello, Stacey. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited to see you.
I'm delighted to see you. Honestly, I've been looking forward to this for quite a long time because talking to you is one of my absolute favorite things to do. So I'm really happy to be here.
Well, the feeling is mutual, and I can definitely say that listeners of this podcast are super excited about this conversation for two reasons. One, they love you. They absolutely love you, and they love all of your work, especially the Queen's Path, which we've talked about. And our last episode on memory was amazing. I got so much feedback on it. And today we're talking about something else that I see cropping up in the writing world and really everywhere. And that is the use of psychedelics for healing, for understanding memories. And you, my friend, have written what I'm going to call the Bible on this. So I'm going to hold this up, Mushroom Pharmacy. If you want to know everything and anything about psilocybin and other psychoactive mushrooms, this is the book for you. And so I think that's probably a good place for us to begin, which is what would you like us to know about Mushroom Pharmacy and anything you'd like us to know about you that maybe we haven't covered?
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for showing everybody the book. The book was a labor of love. It came to me kind of as a surprise, as books can do. So my agent had asked me when I first got the book deal for The Queen's Path, what else do you do? What else could we focus on? And I was like, well, I am a certified psychedelic therapist. So I do that. And he was like, oh, I could totally sell a psychedelic book. Like, ooh, Michael Pollan, right? Like he was really popular at the time. And I was like, ooh, I don't know if I'm ready to write a book. I feel like I need to know more. I need to do more because that's always my thing is like, if I need to know something, I need to go get a PhD in it, right? So he was like, well, okay, well, when you're ready. And then a couple days later, he got a request for proposals from a publisher for a book entitled Mushroom Pharmacy because it was going to be a companion book to a book called Cannabis Pharmacy, which had done really well for Hachette and Black Dog and Leventhal, which are the publishers and the imprint. And I wanted to keep my agent happy. So I wrote a proposal and I got so into the proposal. I was so excited to talk about the neuroscience and I was so excited to talk about like, oh, there are these kinds of mushrooms and this happens in this part of the world. And so I just really kind of nerded out on the whole thing and sent him this huge proposal thinking I was done because I doubted, they weren't going to hire little old me. They were going to hire somebody recommended by Michael Pollan or something, right? No, they hired me. It came as a really wonderful validation that all the sciencey nerd stuff really paid off. And it was so much fun. I love this book and I love doing psychedelic therapy. It's amazing and really is transformative for people. So, yeah, I'm super excited to talk about it today.
So I think that creates a follow up question for me because people hear psychedelic therapy and, psychedelics are being changed in terms of the laws and the classes that they fall into. And so it's becoming more accessible. And I think the research is there showing the merits, right? There's always been this question like, is this beneficial or not? And now the merits are being shown. But if people don't know what psychedelic therapy is, can you give us a sense of that?
Of course. So psychedelic therapy has been around now for about 10 years, mostly started with the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Research and the MAPS organization. They've been doing this work for 20, 30 years, advocating for psychedelics to be changed in the federal schedule. And they started doing research on MDMA a couple years ago, trying to officially change the scheduling. And they worked through Johns Hopkins and University of California, San Francisco, UCLA, UCSD, all of these big institutions that really gave some gravitas to the imprimatur of doing the research. The research has shown time and time again that when people enter a non-ordinary state of consciousness to work on unconscious material, they wind up with really great outcomes, often better than traditional therapy and medication. So, and now there's like hundreds, if not thousands of research papers that have been written on this, that the outcomes for psychedelic therapy, even just one psychedelic session, meaning not one session alone, but the preparation, the medicine session, and then the integration sessions afterwards. So one course of treatment is better than being on a year of SSRIs like Prozac. So it's pretty incredible the outcomes that people are experiencing, and the research is there to show it that it is sometimes more effective, and it is at least as effective as traditional therapy and SSRIs.
Okay, that is huge.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading about MDMA and the research that was being done in The Body Keeps the Score because they were looking into it back then. And I believe, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, it was 1 or 2 years ago where they decided that they weren't going to legalize MDMA for therapeutic use.
It was last summer. Yeah.
Yeah. So the research has been there, the promise has been there. What do you think is different about psilocybin, which is a psychoactive substance that comes from mushrooms? How can that be beneficial for people if they're doing it the right way or a way that is the most supportive?
Yeah. So let's talk about it from the perspective of if you didn't know anything about psychedelics, right? I would say that psychedelic mushrooms have been used the world for millennia to help people heal. We know this. We have images from different parts of the world carved into stelae, carved into different tracks. We know that people have used psychoactive substances like mushrooms and ergot to have a psychedelic experience to help them heal. And that healing experience is what we think the purpose is, right? And there's lots of esoteric ideas about why that is, what that is, the fact that mycelium kind of help trees communicate and it looks a lot like neural structure. Like we can go into all that esoteric stuff. The bottom line is that from a neuroscience perspective, psilocybin, when it's translated through the liver into psilocin, which is the active component that is actually used by the brain, looks a whole lot like serotonin. It is a serotonergic substance, and our brains need serotonin in order to do their work. So serotonin is the most needed neurotransmitter in the brain, and it takes the longest to create in the brain. It's necessary, but it's long. It's got a very long creative life. You can't just say, oh, I need some more serotonin and get some because the brain takes a while to make it. And drugs like SSRIs, the way that they do that is that they sit in the interstitial space in the neuron and they tell the neuron, don't recycle this, let it sit here for a little while so that we can use it again. And if you understand that about how serotonin reuptake inhibitors work, then what you realize is that that lifespan of a neurotransmitter is so critical. And if we can do anything to shift it upward, to make it more efficient, then we're helping the brain do something different, do something better, right? So use its resources more effectively. All that to say, when you give someone psilocybin or when someone takes psilocybin, they get this upsurge in serotonin. And then all the other neurotransmitters also follow in an attempt to rebalance the brain in terms of its neurotransmitter load. That surge of serotonin kind of goes up in the brain, and What also happens with psilocybin and a handful of other drugs, but mostly psilocybin, is that the default mode network, which is our usual day-to-day brain that's worrying about the shopping list, it's worrying about grandma, that's worrying about kids' grades, it's worrying about, did I get my book proposal? Did I send the right form? All of that stuff, it goes offline when you take psilocybin. And when you take the default mode network offline, what happens is all those other places in the brain are then able to connect and communicate with each other. And you've also added all this neurotransmitter load that helps the connections happen more rapidly and more efficiently. It's phenomenal. And in the terms of healing, in terms of creativity, that's the kind of connection that makes people feel like they've got a boost. It makes people get into the depths of where maybe they've been searching for something and they couldn't find it. And they're like, oh, now I have the answers, right? Because it can come because a different part of the brain is connecting to answer that question.
I love that description and how it's getting past, say, our defenses or the worried mind. And it's the fact that you can get past that that allows healing to happen. And I can definitely say that was an experience that I had with a journey that I did that was very intentional, very carefully done with integration. And I'll be honest, I'm still integrating it. And I think that's an important piece. Like, we're going to talk about that, that the meaning making process takes time. For me, what was really interesting is that I have done a ton of healing around my own trauma. I could tell you everything about how it works, what happened, all the stuff, right? And so I didn't need that. That wasn't even the intention. The intention was like, show me what else I need to know. And that was the big piece of the intention. And what I ended up doing was going into the matrix of love, that I could start crying now because it was so incredible and so beautiful. And what happened is that every single experience that I had had, all of the negative experiences, I went through them, but not as like, oh, here's the trauma and let's go through all of the negative emotions. It was like, here are the people who loved you in these moments. And this is how this experience helped you. Even now, I can connect so deeply to the love of the people who knew nothing about what was happening in my life and showed up, right? And that was a powerful experience of resourcing that I'm still taking with me and unpacking. But I think the other piece that came from that, which was really interesting because not every single time people do psilocybin or any of the other psychedelics that you're in the matrix of love. You may not be there. And
Yeah.
I found this really interesting decision point where when these memories were coming up to be reintegrated in a new way, there was this like, here was the darkness, like the dark rabbit hole that I could just blow it away.
Yeah.
And I kept making that decision in a way that kept me in this matrix of love that was incredibly beautiful and supportive.
So what you're describing is the set and setting. So we talk about set and setting when we are preparing people to go into psychedelic experiences. And the set is the mindset. How are you approaching this journey? What's your intention? But also, what are you hoping to participate in when you go? Are
Yeah.
you trying to go into the matrix of love? Are you trying to, if you're a musician, say, are you trying to understand the spirit of the piano that you're trying to compose this piece for? Like, what are you going to integrate? What are you integrating yourself into as part of your mindset of the journey? And that's one of the critical pieces of preparing for a psychedelic journey is the mindset or the set. And the other piece is the setting. So you go into setting and you create a space of calm and happiness and ease and support so that when you go, you're not disrupted while you're in it, right? Like, you make sure you're wearing comfortable clothes. You don't have crazy music playing. You know, I did an interview about psychedelics the other day, and the guy had all these great quotes that he was talking through. And I was like, yeah, we don't want to like probably listen to Black Sabbath while we're doing, psychedelics is probably not the right environment. So you bring in things that are going to be supportive and encouraging of your journey, not things that are going to be disruptive. Now, encouraging of your journey doesn't mean soft necessarily.
Yeah.
It could mean that you're trying to confront something that's challenging, but you still want the set to have that in mind, and you want the setting to support it. So you don't want it to be painful. For example, you don't want to be sitting on a hard bed. You don't want to be
Yeah.
wearing itchy socks. Everything should be comfortable and good for you in the moment.
Yeah, and really intentional. And this is a different modality, but I think there's similarities in holotropic breath work or other kinds of breath work that put you in a non ordinary state. Having that set in the setting, I think also it's about who is there to walk with you through that. Because, yes, I just told you, listeners, about the matrix of love, and you might be thinking, ooh, I want to go there too. Well, guess what? Not necessarily in a psilocybin journey, but in other journeys, I've also had to confront some of my biggest fears or pain points in a nurturing way. Right. And I think that's the piece. It wasn't like walking into the nightmare and feeling nightmarish, but it was like feeling the hard feelings that I had not yet processed and being
Right.
willing to be with those feelings, which I would imagine is some of the work that you do with people.
That's right. That's exactly it. Yeah. Especially in preparing them to put them in the mindset, we're going to traverse this. I'm going to be here with you. And with psilocybin in particular, that journey can be 6 hours. It can be kind of the shortest I think I've ever done is 3. It can be 6 hours, it can be 8 hours, it can be long. Ketamine, which is the only one that's legal in California, that's like 2 hours, easy peasy. But 6 hours with somebody who's going through waves of understanding, because you kind of come in and out, you don't kind of stay in the depths the whole time. It's important for the person who's sitting with you to be committed to holding you, basically, like saying, no, no, I got you. We're not going anywhere. I'm not entering into your experience with my goals. It really is important to work with somebody who knows what they're doing. It doesn't have to be a therapist. A person who's been trained hopefully knows these things. It can be someone you trust who's not going to try to make it about them, as long as they know that they're there to support you.
Yeah, and so we've talked about set and setting. If someone is wondering about whether or not this is the right path for them, I want to talk first about what are the other parts of the journey so we feel like
Mhm.
we've talked about that, and then we can talk about when this may or may not be beneficial to someone. But let's just stay with setting and then the journey and then what else is needed.
So you don't ever want to do this alone if it's at all possible. So you need a trustworthy person. You want to do the preparation work. It can be one day, it can be weeks sometimes for people to prepare. And it depends on what you're looking to traverse as part of your experience, on how much time you would set aside. If you want to traverse something hard and difficult, yeah, you might need a couple of weeks of writing, drawing, meditation, reflection to really kind of be comfortable in the confrontation of this difficult thing. I ask my clients to kind of work out in advance symbols that have been important to them throughout their lives. So, for example, if somebody's a Christian or a Buddhist, or if they have a particular spiritual practice, like what is going to be meaningful to you, so that if you are confronted by that, you welcome it. You don't find it frightening. If you're suddenly overwhelmed by the bodhisattva of love in Kuan Yin and she shows up and just holds you, that could be overwhelming for someone if they've only had kind of a distance relationship with that particular goddess, right? So we want to kind of have a dictionary going in, like what is possible, right? So that your psyche is primed to have that symbolism be activated in a way that is meaningful to you, that you can work through later without being frightened by it or overwhelmed by it. That's kind of the first thing. Like, what are the symbols? What are the things that are important to you? Who do you look to? What do you reflect on? And it doesn't have to be necessarily spiritual in a religious sense. It could be, I love my grandmother. My grandmother was my greatest support. She believed in me, whatever. Or my dog from when I was 10. Pick your symbols and then really develop them, almost like you're writing a story. Who's welcome? And the other part is sitting with the idea of understanding how resistance works when you are in a non ordinary state. This is one of the hardest things for people to understand. Resistance, when you are in a non ordinary state, does not show up as resistance. It may come up in your body, sure, as rigidity, but resistance is going to show up feeling like it's coming from another realm. Resistance is going to come up feeling like it's, oh, this is the devil coming to get me, or this is some negative influence in my life, or some symbolic negative influence. It's my abusive father, or it's coming into my experience. Like, that's good that you recognize that symbol and its resistance. What does that symbol of resistance mean in advance? Recognizing that resistance is part of the process. Part of going into these psychedelic experiences is to learn how to break through resistance. So that we are recognizing that resistance is put there by culture, put there by trauma, put there by our history, but we have power over it. So knowing that that could happen, can happen. And sometimes resistance is not confronting it, isn't unpleasant. Sometimes it's joyful. You're in the realm of love and the matrix of love, and you're like, oh, okay, where does it show up here? But these things can happen and that they don't have to be frightening. One of the things that you learn in becoming a psychedelic therapist, for me, it was a really hard idea that all is welcome. So whatever shows up, we are not going to turn it away. We're not going to say it's bad. And this idea that there is an inner healing intelligence that is there for our well-being and overall capacity to heal, not only physically, in the same way if you cut your finger, it heals automatically, but also spiritually, psychologically, emotionally. That healing intelligence is part of us, and it's part of the gift of being human or being alive. And I struggled with it in the beginning because I felt like, how do I wrap my head around that from a scientific perspective? But once I told myself that I didn't have to separate my spiritual from my scientific mind, it became much easier.
It's a great answer. And some of the things that I want to say, just to offer a concrete example, is that for me, when we think about the setup, right, I was really thinking about how can I have an intentional diet, especially for a few days. I was like a week and a half before setting that up, doing a lot of journaling and thinking about what is my intention and how will I approach this and what are my symbols. And when we were setting up the room, we were literally setting it up in a very spiritual way of like, we call in all of our guides and we call in everything that is for our highest good, and we expel anything that is not. If this is not for my highest good, then it is not allowed in this space. So we did that work. And something that you said that I think is really important for people to understand, and I know you're going to be able to expand on this far greater than I can, is the fact that so much of this is symbolic, right? And archetypal. So the experiences that you may have may not be the literal experience that you had, say, in your ordinary life.
Right. In traditional settings where we got these medicines from, they always had preparations that included fasting and not eating meat, not having sex, like all of these things that help make sure that the person is fully dedicated, that their energy is held for this experience. And what we know now scientifically is that we don't want to change your brain chemistry, right? So we want your brain chemistry dedicated to you. So if you can have a lighter diet, if you cannot eat meat, if you cannot have sex, if you can do all those things a week or so before your experience, it's very helpful. It doesn't mean that if you do those things that you won't have a good experience, but we know that it's very helpful to prepare your body for that experience. To follow on to the last thing you said about expelling, we don't welcome anything that's not for my highest good. That's ritual, right? In speaking about the archetypal and the way of symbolically looking at this whole thing, we know that symbolic language and symbolic experience is critical to our understanding as human beings. We try to make this woo-woo as though symbolism isn't replete through our everyday life all the time. But it is. Like, think about, you're driving down the street and you see a pickup truck with an American flag on it. You immediately have an opinion, right? Like, you see somebody, I don't know, carrying a Bible, you immediately have an opinion. And I'm not saying good or bad opinion. You just have a meaning that shows up for you.
Yes.
Symbolism is part of our understanding of ourselves. It's part of our understanding of our world. So the only way to interact with it is through some sort of ritualization. And the unconscious understands symbolism much better than it understands language. So if you can be in dialogue with that symbolic world, then you're going to get a whole lot more out of your psychedelic experience. And the archetypal realm, I don't like to think of it as separate from me. I think about it as something I'm integrated in. So I'm suffused in it like air all the time. If you can think of it that way, then you are in interaction with those symbols all the time. It's really about the dialogue, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, that you have with those symbols, and becomes really critically important. You can't divorce yourself from it.
Yeah, no, you can't. And I love how you said that it's really important to think about what are the positive symbols, right? What's that positive symbology that you're going to bring in? But also, what are the symbols that can suggest resistance? Right. So what are the things that could show up that are like, oh, it feels like a bad trip or a bad experience, but no, this is the resistance psychologically. Can we welcome it so that we can move through whatever the experience is? And I think as you were talking about this, I haven't really had a lot of issues with resistance for myself. And that's largely because when powerful feelings come, when an experience has come up, the story that I'm telling myself in that moment is like, oh, here we are moving through. So I can welcome it even if it is uncomfortable. And I'm not going to say it was like comfortable stuff because some of it was like pretty messy and ugly. And I also allowed it. And I think that was really beneficial. It's been huge for my own healing to be able to do that and to know that even when it is incredibly uncomfortable, I am also okay. This has also taken place in very intentional settings where I am with a guide, where things are happening that support that process. That's also an important piece, which you said, like, don't do this alone. You need to have someone who can be a guide, that can be there and be there for you and with you.
For me, it's recognizing that we don't go through this life alone, right? None of us are navigating by ourselves. We need each other. And so having at least one person, and the person, like I said, doesn't have to be an expert. They just have to be really trustworthy, that they're going to have your best at heart the whole time. And it's really important that they know, don't impede my experience. If I'm having a hard time, just hold my hand. If I ask you to hold my hand, hold my hand. If I ask you to sit next to me, it happens less with psilocybin and more with like MDMA, but sometimes people get really strong feelings for like, I want to make love to you, or I want to be touched by you. Like, we don't do that, right? Because then you're entering a new experience as opposed to confronting an existing experience. So that's really important to remember, that we don't ever engage in anything that's like sexual or even emotionally charged in the session itself with another person. It's all about the person having the experience. The guide is there to just support that experience. It's also important after a psychedelic experience that you don't make any big changes for at least a couple of weeks or months. If you have this experience and you're like, oh, I know what I need to do. I need to sell my house and move to Nepal. Like, it breaks. No, wait 6 months before you decide to sell your house and move to Nepal, because there's something in here that needs to be integrated, right? And if there weren't, it wouldn't have shown up as this big, overwhelming change. So let's integrate the experience, and then in 6 months you can make a decision. Yeah, another big one: don't make big decisions immediately after a psychedelic experience, ever.
Yeah, definitely wait it out. And a couple of things I just want to point out that you just said is when you're talking about that trusted person that's there for you, a couple of words that were coming up for me: boundaried and grounded, right? That person needs to be grounded in their own experience so that they don't have to change yours, and very boundaried to know what is mine and what is yours. And to remember that this is more of an internal experience. It's not about creating a new memory. It's about reprocessing what is already there. And what I would say for people who are not necessarily interested in psychedelic journeys, a takeaway that you might want to think about is that aspect of symbology and thinking about what are the things that you're welcoming into, say, your writing life. Or if you find that you're continually writing about the same person, what is the resistance there? Could you be curious about what the resistance is or what that might mean for you? What else could you learn around it? And you can learn about that in a lot of different ways, but that's something that you can take away from this, even if you're like, I'm really curious about this topic, to think about it. I'm never going to do that. These are some ways that you can work with it for yourself. So we've talked about the journey itself. And what I want to say, to just plug your book, is that you go into this in, I would say, great detail, but also accessible detail, especially around the journeying piece. You really help people think about what it is they need to do. So if you're like, I think I need to know more, well, what you need to do is buy Stacey's book. That's what you need to do. And the link is going to be in the show notes for you to do that. But to get back to this conversation, we've talked a little bit about the journey. Is there anything else that you would like us to know about the journeying process? And then can we move to integration? Because I think that's a piece that I think is often missed.
Yes, I would say just for the journey itself, make sure you have your tools available. So if you are a writer, make sure you have a journal and some pens and some markers. If you like to draw or you use that as a form of integration, make sure you have pastels or colored pencils or something that's available to you in the session, because material that comes up out of the unconscious sometimes doesn't come out in words. And if you do have a guide, you want that person there taking notes. You want to have some record of your experience that's beyond your memory, because your memory is not going to remember the way your artifacts will help jolt your memory. So it becomes really important to write, draw, record as much as you can. Yeah, so on to integration. Integration is so critically important, and there's a couple of reasons, right? The first is the nerdy science reason. So one of the things that happens with psychedelics, especially psilocybin, is that it creates new structure in the brain. One exposure to psilocybin creates neurogenesis and synaptogenesis in laboratory models. So we don't know if this is what happens in humans, but we predict it is from what we see in fMRI studies. But what they've seen in laboratory studies, which means animal studies, is that one exposure to psilocybin and you have new neurons and new synapses, which is crazy. We don't have any other medication that does that. It's nuts. It's magic, right? Like it's crazy. But what happens is if you don't integrate those new structures into working pathways in the brain, they go away because the brain has a natural pruning process that it uses to take care of itself so that it doesn't have too much to manage.
Yes.
So if you have this big insight in your journey and then you don't integrate it, guess what? It's going to go away. And the research shows this. So what an integration process is taking the information, taking the new structure and concretizing it and using it in new circuitry so that you have access to it on a permanent basis. And if you don't do the integration, you lose the benefit. So integration is the most important part. And integration is not a singular thing. As you said, it can take months. I have a client, we've been integrating material from 2 psychedelic sessions for 4 years.
Wow.
Crazy, right? But it's still producing insight. So why not? All that being said, if you don't integrate, it's going to be just like a roller coaster ride. You just took a ride. Yeah, it might have been fun, but it doesn't mean anything. Whereas going for the integration piece, it creates new meaning, it gives you more depth, it gives you more access to yourself. So the integration to me is the most important part of doing any kind of psychedelic or work with non-ordinary states of consciousness. You have to do the integration.
Yeah. I have some concrete examples of things that I've done, but I'm wondering if you could share some of the concrete examples of like, here are the ways that I might help someone integrate, thinking more of like activities that you might have done.
A lot of the activities are art and writing and creating stories. This becomes a piece of narrative therapy. I have a client I'm thinking of right now. It was interesting because look at me. I look like a soccer mom. I don't look like somebody who you're going to be like, oh, that's my psychedelic person, right? And so he didn't know that I did psychedelic therapy. And he didn't see me for a long time before I got trained. And he's a musician, he's a music producer, he lives that kind of life. And so he wound up being really stuck and he did some mushrooms on a weekend with no help and had a really difficult session and then was embarrassed to bring the content to therapy because he thought I was going to disapprove. And I was like, oh no, I'm a psychedelic therapist. Are you kidding? Like, bring all of it. And in this session, he was really frightened by the material. Again, looking at the resistance piece. His mom had passed away when he was young. And in the imagery of this, there was a dragon. And the dragon was coming through and weaving through, it was almost like a snake, weaving through all of these rooms in his house and his business. And when the dragon finally got to him, his mother was in the center of the dragon's mouth. And as we looked at this symbolism over months and months and months, it changed. And so that symbolism would show up in dreams, it would show up in daydreaming, it would show up in creative writing sessions, it would show up in sessions with his clients because he produces music for other people. And he was just like, it's opening up. And it eventually transformed to where the dragon became his friend. And when the dragon showed up, he knew that there was something for either him or for the artist he was working with to confront in their creativity.
Wow.
It was really powerful and usually something painful because for him, it was about losing his mom.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing is like really working with the symbols, understanding what they mean, offering a different potential meaning for them over time, and doing that through art and various forms of creativity. And like in my own case, this was more from holotropic breathing, but I think it fits with this as well, is making mandalas. Right. So after every single session, we would make a mandala and then you would write something, maybe a poem or just a few words. It really depended. And you would have that. And I have all of them. And what I do with that is not just that I did the artwork, which was important in and of itself, but then I placed the artwork in my space. so that the integration continues every time I visit with that. And I have a painting that I created after this last session. So I have this painting that I can look at and also continue that integration and continue to journey about it. So I think having physical things in your space that you can visit with, in addition to talking through them, those can be really powerful ways to keep those neural networks and those synapses active and permanent in your brain.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. And what's interesting, I've done this training in France to do auto-induced cognitive trance, which is another modality for non-ordinary states of consciousness. And several of the things that we do in that is like we do drawing and we do something called proto-écriture, which is like automatic writing, but you're not trying to write words, you're just trying to make shapes that look like words. And the meaning behind it, according to this modality, is that it's going to be imprinted with the meaning in the moment, and then you're going to be able to go back to it and recover the meaning from the moment and then add to it. That's part of the training of this, is that you use these artifacts to help integrate, but also to push forward. So, yes, creating any kind of material record of your experience is really, really useful. It's not absolutely necessary, but I find that creative people do better when they have created some artifact, whether it's a drawing or writing a poem or writing a song or even just writing out their experience longhand. You know, if you're a writer, especially, like that engagement with the writing process really does keep you engaged in the integration.
Yeah, it's extremely tactile. Well, there's the research out there that shows that this can be really beneficial to people. And we have talked about some of the ways that it can be beneficial for people, but it's like anything that there can be something that's great for some people and not so great for others. When might this be beneficial and when might it be not a good idea?
There's some guidelines. We do not do psychedelic therapy with people who have active or latent psychosis ever, because the presence of the psychosis means they are already in an altered state of consciousness. And if they don't live there, it's not likely that you're going to tip them into a permanent state of psychosis, but it's possible. And there are many, many people who have had psychedelic experiences who then go on to be really psychologically, I don't want to say damaged, but challenged afterward, because your belief system is challenged or your way of life is challenged by what you confronted in the experience. And if you have very rigid beliefs, it's probably going to be a really hard experience for you. The confrontation in the resistance is going to be really, really challenging. That to say, I don't think that rigid belief system is disqualifying, but psychosis is. I've had clients that are schizophrenic, clients that are bipolar with psychosis, who found out that I do psychedelics and like, oh, I would sign me up. I'm like, no, I'm sorry, we don't do that. We don't do that with people who have a risk of psychosis, even if you're medicated. We don't do it. Which is something I should add in terms of preparation. If you take SSRIs, you should discontinue them for several days before doing specifically psilocybin. You could wind up with serotonin syndrome. So that's another means of preparation. But yeah, so definitely no psychosis. People who are actively in some sort of trauma, we do not do psychedelics with those people. You need a little distance from the trauma before you can engage the psychedelic medicine, because the confrontation and the grief and the pain are just too overwhelming. It could be that you wind up just diving into grief, and we don't want that at all. We're looking for a transformation of the grief, not being imbued in a way that's hard to change. Not when you're in active trauma, for sure. One of the interesting things is that one of the outcomes with these medicines is that there's often a feeling of well-being for a little while afterward, and that's from the rise in all the neurotransmitters in the brain. And that in and of itself can become addicting. And so I've had several people who have lots of trauma, and then they spend every weekend of every month going on ayahuasca journeys. And it's like, no, 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 you got to come back. You got to come back, because that version is not useful. Chasing the well-being, right? Not helpful.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think I've seen for some people an escapism culture developing where it's like, oh, let's keep journeying. And the journey becomes real life, right? And real life becomes not very useful. So, yeah, really respecting this for the medicine that it is and making sure that you're using it respectfully and responsibly for healing, recognizing that yes, you may have a boost in mood, but that's a great benefit. Say thank you when
Right.
it's there, and then say, and that's okay when it's gone. But also to recognize that the way I see it is like the window of tolerance. We want the experience to remain in the window of tolerance. And so if you are in active grief, active trauma of any kind, you're already probably pretty far over in the window of tolerance. And so you're going to get tipped out of there very easily. And that's not useful. It's not useful to
Right.
you.
I love that you brought up the window of tolerance because I think most people don't. If you haven't been trained as a therapist, it's not the place where you go, right? So giving us that focus to say, like, what can you tolerate? And it means that the person who's suffering has to get comfortable with their suffering, right? They have to not be trying to avoid their suffering or trying to mitigate their suffering. And that's really hard. But it also, if you're talking about a place from a therapeutic perspective, then that tells you where to go. Like, I need you to be here with me. I need us to be, me as the therapist, like, be here with you. So, not that we sanction suffering like you should be suffering, but that we say that suffering is a normal part of life. And we want to get through it as quickly as possible so that it's not dominating everything. So, how do we do that? And then, when we're through the initial pain, the initial grief, then we can talk about a journey to make more meaning from what you experienced.
Yeah. And what I would say also, because I do see this, that there are the people who have trauma and they avoid it. And then there are the people who run towards the pain. And they're like, you're going to take me to a painful place. I've been there before. Let's stay there for a while. I'm going to rip the band aid off and go through all the hard things at once. And so I would say that if that's your experience, and I'm going to raise my hand just so nobody thinks like I'm judging, because I'm not. I have complex PTSD at one point in time in my life. That is how I operated. It was like, oh, if it's painful, I know how to do that. And that's somewhat comfortable. But what I've learned over time through healing is like, no, I was just living at the edge of my window of tolerance at all time because my nervous system had been trained that that was normal. And it is not healthy or normal. It's not healthy and it's not good for your body. So, yeah, just be really kind to yourself and no, you could just be curious about it and say, how can I be more gentle? Yeah, so we have talked about the times this might work, the times when it may not work. We've gone through the whole journeying process. And now I want to wrap it up by talking about the foundational pieces of this podcast, which is writing your resilience. And some of the things that I'm observing that I think we want to be really responsible around. So last time we talked about the memoir, The Tell, which there's lots of scandals around. I will put New York Times article in the show notes if someone wants to read about it. But the main point is this person went on a psychedelic journey and then had what they believed was a recovered memory of severe sexual abuse. And then they wrote a memoir about it, accusing of a person of this. I've also been pitched even by other people who have memoirs that have a psychedelic component to it. I have not read those memoirs and I haven't read The Tell, so I can't comment on the content of these books beyond things I've read around them. But it just makes me think about something that people say to me all the time is like, I want to own my truth. And the reality is that these experiences can be very powerful and they can give you an experience or help you understand your experience and maybe an aspect of your truth a little better. But what do we do with what may seem like a recovered memory or a reconstituted memory, which is something we talked about last time? So that we're using this responsibly.
It's so important to talk about this. I'm so glad you brought it up because, as we spoke about before, memory in and of itself is plastic. Memory is not like a computer experience, right? You don't put a file somewhere and it's uncorrupted and always the same. It changes over time based on how many times you expose yourself to the memory and how much you discuss it and the details that get added or taken away. So now add psychedelics to it where you're supercharging the memory with emotion and visual stimulation and musical stimulation and all the stuff. It's like adding fuel to a fire. It's not going to give you a more reliable memory. It's going to give you a more emotional memory. The medicine is going to turn up the volume on the emotion and the symbolism of the memory. If it even uses a real memory, it could create an entirely fictional symbolic experience that conveys the sentiment or the feeling or the emotional depth of the experience without giving you the actual lived details. Thinking about a client experience, he knew that this experience was not the lived experience that he had, but by his telling, it seemed like it was his absolute memory where he was transported back to his family home. He grew up very poor in central Illinois. So it was cold, and he's in his cold room on the bare floor as a small child, and he's living in this family home by himself and trying to figure out and crying because he doesn't know how he's going to eat. He doesn't know how he's going to feed himself. He doesn't know how he's going to do anything. And that is a symbolic experience. Now, whether that happened or not doesn't matter, right? Like the feeling of that little 3 or 4 year old child is that he was completely abandoned in a cold place with no one caring for him. That feeling is real. That historical assessment of himself at that age is real. The assessment is real. The lived experience of the cold room and the nobody home and nobody to feed me, we don't know if that's real or not. But it doesn't matter because the experience was real. And people really struggle with that because they want the experience to be the facts.
Yes.
They're not the same. The subjective experience is not objective experience.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to relate this to another experience that I've had that's different, which is past life regression. So I've done past life regression. In one past life regression, I was a witch being burned at the stake, right? And so did that happen at some other point in my journey of my soul? Who knows? And it doesn't even matter. What mattered for now is that I felt like I could not speak my truth. And if I did, I would be annihilated. That experience, that feeling state was very important to this lifetime, right? So that was a story. This is how I translate it for myself and how I talk about it with other people. It's like, we can't know that for a fact. But what we can know is that that is a feeling that you have. And this is a story that helped you connect with that feeling so that you could understand it and do something different with it.
Yeah, exactly. And the bottom line is whether, for example, past lives exist or not, who knows? I have no reason to think they don't. I have no reason to think they do. But I know that what you're describing, that experience of being afraid of betrayal, being afraid of your truth, being afraid of putting yourself out there in front of people makes a difference in how you live your life. And that's what we're doing when we're doing psychedelic therapy, is confronting those things.
Oh my gosh, this has been such a great conversation. I've loved it so much. If you could leave people with just one thing, they're like, if you take nothing else away from this conversation, I want you to hold on to this and put it in your pocket. What would that be?
It would be that you matter and you are bigger than you think. And your experiences can tell you and show you how important you are, how valuable your contribution is, and that you matter in your life and in other people's lives. And you can experience that in psychedelics or not. You can experience it in doing holotropic breath work. You can experience it in trance. You can experience it in spiritual experiences. But I want to ask you to give yourself permission to confront the fact that you matter and your life is bigger than you think it is.
I just love how you just said that. Confront that you matter. Ugh, imagine what the world would be like if we all did that.
Yeah, be magical.
Oh my gosh, it would be so magical, and it's gonna be something I'm gonna be inviting people to do again and again and again. Well, thank you so much for being on the show again for this trifecta experience. Like, we've done all of this stuff together, and it has been such a treat. I've learned so much from you, and I'm just deeply grateful to know you, and I wanna just thank you again for being on the show.
Lisa, it is absolutely my pleasure. You are one of the lights in the world, one of the lights in the writing world, especially. And I am so grateful to get to be part of your journey. So thank you for inviting me. I will always welcome the opportunity to talk to you, whether it's over coffee or with a microphone.
I feel the same way. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Stacey, and most importantly, buy copies of The Queen's Path and Mushroom Pharmacy, please see the show notes for this episode. And if you would like to take this conversation a little deeper, grab your journal and answer the following questions. What symbols and rituals support your creativity and bring you peace and joy? And which symbols might be a sign of resistance? You can make my day by leaving an insight you had, a thought, or a question about this episode or anything else you would like me to cover on the show. Speaking of your thoughts on the podcast, I'd like to give a shout out to Shannon's channel, Simple Goodness 6439, You Babble, and Deborah Copperud for sharing your thoughts on my conversations on author platforms and family constellations work. It was so wonderful to hear from all of you. And listeners, if you haven't had a chance to reach out to the show, I would love to hear from you too. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I couldn't do this podcast without your support. If you love this episode, here are 3 simple ways that you can keep this show thriving. 1, subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. 2, leave a 5-star review so others can find the show. 3, join my engaged dynamic community by signing up for the Writing Your Resilience newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of Ditch Your Inner Critic, 5 tools to transform self-doubt into self-support. Until next time, remember that your story matters. As you write and connect with the truest, most authentic version, you become not just the writer, but the person you're meant to be. And that, my friends, is the real freedom writing can offer.